Okay, testing. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We can even get kicked off just a minute or so early. So first, would love to thank you all for coming. I'm excited to talk about this with you all today. I would start, if it's okay with you all, with a round of introductions. So I can introduce myself and then do my best to get out of the way and moderate. My name is Peter Grabowski. I run an applied research team at Google, focused on getting Gemini into production. So this topic of frontier models is very near and dear to my heart. I teach, so I'm on the faculty at UC Berkeley and Yeshiva, and I also advise. So I'm an advisor to two different venture funds, one here in town, Glasswing Ventures, and another down in New York called Westcap. And I'll turn it over to Dow.
All right, yeah, hi everyone. Dow Kila, CEO at Contextual AI. I'm also an adjunct professor at Stanford. That's more for recruiting purposes and for fun. So before starting this company, I was the head of research at Hugging Face. And before that, spent 5 years at Facebook AI Research, where my claim to fame as a researcher, among other things, is as one of the co-inventors of RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation.
Awesome. My name is Lisa Dolan. I'm a managing director at Link Ventures. As you guys know, probably John Warner. Everybody in this room knows John Warner. He's a partner with me at Link. We invest in very early stage technical teams, predominantly MIT and Harvard, and we're located just across the street in Kendall Square. And I focus on, and I'll get to, a lot of AI native marketplaces, and my background is both as a marketplace founder and started my career actually on the other side of the risk spectrum in municipal and corporate bonds, managing money for high net worth individuals.
Hey everyone, Vedant Agrawal. I'm an early stage investor at a fund called Premji Invest in the Bay Area. Premji Invest is essentially a multi-stage firm. We invest all the way from Series A to pre-IPO in a lot of software companies. I focus a lot of my time on AI, both on the infrastructure and the application space, and super excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you folks for joining. One of the first things I thought we could talk about today is if we're talking about the changing frontier or the changing landscape of frontier models, what do we mean by frontier? So I thought about three different ways to think about the frontier. I'm hoping the panel can comment on them. One is one that's very near and dear to my heart at Google, which is thinking about the Pareto frontier of quality versus efficiency. How do you make the models good enough? How do you make them cheap enough to serve in production? I'd put things like smaller models, faster models, or reasoning into this bucket. The second way of conceptualizing the frontier is a modality frontier. And so to date, we've seen a lot of work in text models. We've seen a lot of work on image models. We've seen some work in video out or images out. But you can easily imagine this is just the start of what's to come. And the third way of conceptualizing the frontier, I think, is maybe the most interesting. And some folks in the last panel were talking about it too, which is the human frontier of understanding. So at the reception last night, someone made a very interesting comment that if you were to freeze model development today, it would still take humans 15 years to catch up to how we think about using them in businesses. How do we think about capturing value? How do we fully exercise them? How do we really understand what they can do? So with that framing, I'd love to talk to the panel members. What's the most interesting way to define the frontier for you? Is it capability, modality, compute? What's the most useful framing in your own work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think because of my background in research, when I think about frontier, I think about frontier labs, right? And so there's only a few of them: OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepMind, and FAIR, I would say, are the four ones. And what characterizes them is that they have a lot of money. So the pragmatic definition of the frontier, I think, is just having lots of resources at your disposal, because AI is a very resource-intensive endeavor.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of my sort of pragmatic definition. I think the more interesting way to think about the frontier is actually not to think about just language models, because everybody's only thinking about language models. That's where all the hype is. But the real problem to think about is, what is the system? Right, so a language model is just a very small part of this much bigger system, and I think that's actually a much more interesting frontier to work on.
Yeah, 100%. Lisa?
Yeah, so I suppose I'll take sort of the commercial mindset. So I just think of the efficient frontier of cost versus compute and quality. And so what I'm looking at now is what we discussed earlier today was, if you actually stop time and didn't have any improvements to models, what are the tremendous amount of use cases that we could find? And so I see the cost versus quality as the sort of frontier, and the models that actually just need to be trained on specific data. But actually the robustness of the models is there. And so I see the frontier of being able to build many different use cases with the current compute and learning on different verticalized niches.
It's a combination of the two, the quality and also the human understanding component.
Yeah.
Awesome. Vedant?
Yeah, I think I echo both Lisa's and Duway's point here that I think one, the model is a construct of a much larger system. And I also feel like when you think of frontier, or where is the frontier with different models, you can think of it in different axes. You can think of it on the tech side. I think we're definitely at the frontier of performance. And I think a lot of optimizations are now going to happen on the cost side of things with models becoming smaller and cheaper, a la DeepSeek that we saw blow up a couple of months back. But I do feel in other modalities, we're not anywhere close to the frontier on performance. And so you think of something like video, you think of something like image, I think there's still a lot of ways to go. I think only very recently have we had multimodal models where you can actually steer them with a reasonable amount of certainty. I'm sure everyone started to play around with DALL-E and create an image and then you say, okay, this image is great, just change this certain part of the image, and then the tool goes and changes everything. I think only very recently have we been able to steer those models appropriately, and I think there's still a lot of headroom for growth on the performance side of things. And then you raise an interesting point on humans and human capability. I feel like people are still more imaginative today when it comes to text models, to your point, Dewey, on where we are. But I feel like we're much further behind on what the capabilities are with image and video models. And so I still think there's a lot of headroom over the next 10, 15 years in kind of interesting applications that get built out here.
That makes a ton of sense. So this is one of the themes that I'll try to keep bringing back up through the session. But a question to keep in the back of your mind: if you were starting your PhD today in this space, where would you spend your time? Where would you spend your research? It looks like we've got our first candidate for that, which is steerability of language or vision models. So I agree 100%. I think there's a lot of fruit there. Maybe now that we've talked a little bit about what the frontier looks like, we can start to put some points on the frontier. And so, Lisa and Vedant, this question is for both of you. Have you seen any companies, have you seen any business models, have you seen any technologies or approaches that you think define or characterize the frontier, that are kind of representative of some of the things that you were just talking about?
Yeah, I think there's multiple applications. I think, when you think of frontier, let's pick on multimodality again, right? I think, there's a lot of work that has been done on voice. And voice is still very much an unsolved problem, which is everything from how do I convert voice to text, which is transcription, how do I reason over the transcription in an appropriate way, and then how do I convert the text back to voice? And then doing all those three together in a steerable manner, which still at low cost and latency is, I think, still a very hard problem. You see OpenAI's models and kind of the speech-to-speech models making some dent there, but I think there's still some ways to go on the voice side of things, and that's, I think, the cutting edge of research. I think there's other things on what we're seeing in interesting business models, which are maybe on the tech side of things, which maybe are not on the cutting edge, but it's really a package solution, to Dow's point on LLMs just being a part of it, which is you see a lot of applications now in very niche industries, which as VCs, we would have probably not looked at maybe 5 years ago because we would have thought the total addressable market is too small. But things in government contracting, things for car mechanics, but which make the lives of people there a lot faster and easier, can suddenly be very interesting businesses, because the average contract values that you can charge your customers are 3 to 5 times larger than what you could do with kind of call it software 2.0, which is not really the frontier, but it's definitely a very interesting application of the systems.
Lisa?
Yeah, so I suppose I'll mention AI recruiting. So I invested in a company called Merker, and it's the category leader of recruiting for OpenAI, Meta, NVIDIA. You guys probably sort of seen in the news, and they are really able to train on given verticals very easily. And so what they'll do is they'll go out and have a request for proposal for PhDs that can label medical images. And so all the large language models now are able to use them to train their models on given verticals. So the idea is very simple, and they want to be the category leader in AI recruiting. But ultimately, AI recruiting is going to be commoditized, and they're going to offer it as a freemium product. And where they have value, and where I'm interested in, is frankly, strong businesses, right? So it's actually not about the AI. Where they have value, and this is a profitable company, a profitable AI company, there's very few of those, is matches, right? It's a old fogey business. They're helping Google, they're helping OpenAI recruit data labelers to improve their models. And how they make money is on 30% of that person's wages, right? It's a recruiting model. And so what I'm looking for are businesses that are actually old fogey business models, but they're amplified with AI. I also see one of my companies, Onlay, shout out, AI to construction and understanding risk in construction. And so again, a sort of old fogey model that is enabled by AI, which is really contract management. And yeah, I think that if anybody's a founder in the room, I'm really looking for strong businesses that then are amplified by AI and marketplaces in particular.
Awesome. Now, I might ask a similar question of you, but from the founder's side. How do you think about navigating the frontier with your company, setting your roadmap, thinking about what people are going to want to use? I've reviewed a lot of the research that you've done. It's absolutely at the frontier. So very interested to hear your perspective in what navigating that frontier is like for you.
Yeah, so for us, it's really on finding the right balance between frontier research. So we're a startup, but we do have a research team, which is unusual, right? We have a bunch of very smart sort of ex-Microsoft research, AWS, Google folks, and they're really thinking about what's going to come next. And what makes us different is that we're thinking about this systems frontier that I just mentioned. So we're not building our own language models because Zuck is very generous. We don't have to, right? So we can take base models that other people have trained and then make them a lot better. So we're really focused on all the components that make up these systems and how do we make them within their little category. So something like a re-ranker, maybe people have heard of re-rankers. We have the best re-ranker in the world. It's the only one that can follow instructions. And that really unlocks a lot of potential that you didn't previously, you couldn't really unlock that without having these instructions where people tell you how you need to rank things. And so retrieval is really the thing that you need to have working if you want to give language models the right context. And so, yeah, that's the most exciting frontier for me.
Amazing. Maybe one quick question about what are the biggest challenges at the frontier. I can share a personal bias, and so in my own work, I found that all of a sudden the model capabilities have exploded. And so it used to be the case that benchmarks led the models, and the models were always trying to hill climb against the benchmarks. And it was very clear and very well understood how to approach things, what the next piece of research you might try was. Now I think we're in the opposite regime, where the models are leading the benchmarks and people are scrambling to catch up on the benchmark side. So that's my personal bias on what makes this the most challenging. Maybe just a quick round. Does that resonate with you all? Are there different things that are the most challenging?
It definitely resonates with me. But I don't know if that is a recent phenomenon which you're describing, right? So I think 5 years ago now, when I was still at FAIR, we had this project called DynaBench. It still exists. It's about dynamic benchmarking, dynabench.org. It's now owned by the ML Commons. And the whole idea of this benchmarking platform was that people are always going to, when there is a benchmark sort of a target, people are just going to hill climb and solve that problem, and then you need to find the next problem to solve. So what we tried to do with the platform was figure out, okay, if we take the latest and greatest model, how can we find the weaknesses in that model, create a new test set for everybody to go after?
Interesting.
And then once you have a new model that does well on that new test set, now you can create another new test set, right? So you have like a dynamic benchmarking paradigm.
Yeah, almost like a boosting approach.
Exactly. So it's like boosting, but so it's adversarial in a way, right? So you're really trying to expose the weaknesses that these models have. And that's much more useful, I think, than to just have random new benchmarks that pop up and then, there's some test set and then it ends up in the training data and things like that. Like the real signal you want to get is actually not test set accuracy. The real signal you want to get is this model useful for people?
Yep.
right? And so that's what you want to try to measure.
Awesome. Lisa or Vedant?
Yeah, I would say both benchmarking, but also interpretability. So understanding how the model got to its output is we're seeing a lot of interpretability companies, but ones that are really focused on a vertical work process, but not a horizontal work process where there's several different collaborators. And that's really where there's a tremendous amount of productivity unlock is if you're connecting a PhD to a business person's process. So I'm not seeing the interpretive models across different different functions.
Sure.
Right? It's only in one given function. It's an engineering function, it's a product function, a business function, a PhD function, but not across functions.
Makes a ton of sense.
But I think, benchmarking is an interesting question because it is single-handedly the best thing and the worst thing in the world of research. I think it's a good thing because everyone knows the goalposts and what they're trying to work towards, and it's a bad thing because you can easily game the system, you can include it in training data sets, and to your point, maybe you introduce an artificial ceiling, and that's why maybe you have dynamic benchmarking. I'm still waiting for the day that we can move beyond benchmarking to actual hey, customers saying, I like this model versus that, because for someone who's not deep in the research field, it's very hard to look at a benchmarking table and say, okay, you scored 99.4 versus someone else scored 99.2. It's very hard to contextualize what that 0.2% difference really means in the real world. So I think it's good to get the field to a certain point, but I'm hoping a couple of years from now, we're standing on stage, we're not, we're just talking about what customers think are the best models for different use cases versus, kind of papers, because it's hard to interpret sometimes.
But that's what companies are already doing now, right? Even like when we develop our models, we look at the benchmarks because we kind of have to report on them.
Yeah.
But there's massive benchmark fatigue, so nobody even believes it, right? So we can say we're the best in the world, and then everybody's like, yeah. But like, what does OpenAI say about that, right? So, I think everybody is already looking at, do real users actually use this in a useful way?
Yeah, I mean, maybe Reddit is a better way to benchmark than academic papers.
Yeah, well, it's user acceptability testing. Right?
Yeah. So there's your second idea for a doctoral dissertation, is using Reddit for benchmarking. I like that quite a bit. Maybe we can do a lightning round of some quick questions. Vedant, you and I were talking about different business models or go-to-market strategies that you found especially compelling. You talked about this a little bit on the voice side of things, but is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's very, very, very interesting business models and strategies that you can take in building, especially at the application layer. I think there's two broad ways, and I know Lisa's going to touch upon one, but one of them is just data, right? How do you get the data that you need to build an application that is 10x better than competition? And there's very different ways that you can go about and source the data that we've seen. You can have services as cool now. And so you can have a services-led approach, which you can use to gather a lot of data from your customers, have the right contracts in place so that you can de-identify that data and use it for training purposes. The second way is you can just outright go buy the data, and you're seeing a lot of these PE-style approaches to venture capital, where venture capitalists are giving money, large sums of money, $50, $60, $70 million to startups to go buy legacy businesses so that mostly they can acquire the data and the know-how. Or you can just kind of create it, on your own, where you can use synthetic data generation, or you have a team of annotators to go create the data itself. So that's one very, very efficient way to build moats, at least in the short to midterm at the application layer. And I think really the sustaining moats that we've seen, at least in businesses that we find interesting, is really on the workflow side of things. Is that how can you get stickier and stickier with your customer? Because a lot of things below the application stack are changing, whether it's to our point on changing frontiers, models, and their capabilities, whether it's the tooling stack, whether it's everything else below. So being closer to your customer and being sticky in their workflow, I think is an interesting approach that most people are taking now.
Yeah. Lisa, anything you would add?
As a venture capitalist, I'll actually suppose use the idea of, I think, private equity as a new opportunity, even though I'm a VC. So I actually see tremendous value now in investing in cash flowing old fogey companies, applying AI to them. We're seeing, Thrive and General Catalyst investing in that space. That said, I haven't seen anybody declare victory. So I'm actually super interested and actually exploring it right now with a moving platform, again, a moving marketplace, and applying AI to that business. But I see an opportunity now to actually not overcapitalize a company, have a crazy pref stack, but actually founders to be able to own a majority of their company and build, as we were saying earlier, SMBs. I actually think that this could be an opportunity for founders and SMBs. And then once you get that model right, then the roll-up strategy. But again, I don't think that a lot of people have just hacked it yet, but I think that is an incredible opportunity, is really cash flowing companies and applying AI to those.
Yeah, 100%. I am a proud failed startup founder myself, and I think the biggest mistake I made, I was looking in the medical billing space, and the biggest mistake I made was not just buying a medical billing company, because the AI was incredibly powerful, even back in 2017. It was the business relationships. It was selling it to doctors. That was really, really difficult.
Yes.
And so it sounds like that resonates with you all as well.
Yes.
Dow, have you seen that in your own work with Contextual?
That is all about relationships.
Yeah.
No pun.
Yeah. I mean, so we're targeting large enterprises, and it just takes a really long time to find your way into some of the world's largest banks, for example. It's like 2-year sales cycle. But then because it is about relationships, so once you have established relationships, it's also very easy to navigate through the organization. So it takes a lot of time and effort, but once you are in there, it pays off as well.
Yeah. What advice would you give to slightly younger me back in 2017, as I was starting my own first ML company, about how to approach the relationships?
About how to approach relationships, I guess the advice I would really give you is to always be at the frontier, actually, like to tie it more back to the theme of this, right? So I always tell startup founders that you should be assuming that the things that don't quite work yet are going to work very soon, and you should be building for that future, right? You can't build with what exists now because everybody has access to the same technology, including Microsoft, and Microsoft definitely has better relationships than you do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So maybe to close this out, we can start with a quick discussion of what do you think is next? So what do you think are the biggest opportunities for disruption? What do you think would it take to shift the transformer-centric model that we have today? Or what do you think are the most important areas for research? Like if you had, I don't know, a budget of 5 PhDs to hire, where would you want to focus their time? And maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so I would invest a lot of time in the thing that is the most overhyped and the most underhyped at the same time, which is agents. Surprise, right? The A word, as people have started calling it.
We made it 22 minutes before talking about agents.
Yeah, so I mean, agents are really going to change the world, and there's a lot of potential, but the technology doesn't quite work yet. So there's a ton of hype around it where people are pretending that it works. It doesn't work yet. But it will soon. So back to my earlier point about being at the frontier, you need to plan for that. And so if I would start a PhD right now, I would focus on how you can personalize agents and how you can really steer them, to your point as well about steerability, so that they actually do what they need to do. And how can you design sort of personalized reward systems so that they can execute on the things that matter.
Personalized alignment, I think, is a really interesting area of research. Lisa, what about you?
So I'll actually add on that. I would really focus, if I were a PhD, on cross-disciplinary agents. So being able to connect agents from PhDs to business. I think that's a tremendous opportunity. Also very much in drug discovery and in healthcare and in regulated industries across discipline. I just invested in AI a while ago, an AI applied to insurance that is connecting marketing with actuaries, 2 different minds, and then also a medical imaging company connecting the business side of healthcare to clinicians. And then in terms of the medium that I'm most interested in and investing in is video. So we touched on voice. I'm investing in video technologies, video applications. I see tremendous opportunities for video as the next frontier as a business. So
absolutely. To close this out, Vidant?
Yeah, I think there's 2 different questions. I think one is, what is the biggest area of disruption? I think one of them is definitely what comes after the transformer. And we're already seeing some early signs of it with state space models. You see it with diffusion-based text architectures as well. And it remains to be seen, how does the ecosystem react? Is there too much CapEx on the ground for the transformer to really be disrupted, or can we think of alternate architectures? But yeah, that's something I'm very excited about right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you, folks. I'm just getting the signal. It looks like we've got time for maybe one question, if anyone has one. And I'll follow you on it. Maybe we've got a question in the front. Go ahead. Yeah.
Such a
My question is for Dewey. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong.
for me.
Yeah.
Dow.
Dow.
As in Dow Jones. Easy
Dow.
to it. You're not the first one to get that.
Apologies. So you were saying before that your thesis is that you're going to focus on the user side as opposed to like building your own LLM, which makes a lot of sense. I sort of see the value chain evolving whereby, I don't want to offend anyone, but like LLMs almost become like commoditized in a utility. But do you find that, like, is it your opinion that if you focus at the user side, you actually, because that's where like the data is, and that you actually won't need potentially the LLM in the end because you kind of evolve yourself out of it?
Yeah, so I think we will need the LLM, but it's just a relatively small part of this system that has to solve the problem. And to your point, right, I think there are lots of good LLMs now, and they're all kind of similar, right? So if I swap in Anthropic or OpenAI or Google or like all of these language models, they're pretty good. So the hard part is actually not the language modeling anymore. The hard part is giving those language models the right context so that they can solve the problem they're solving, right? Or that you like plug them into your agent architecture so that they can actually solve the thing that they need to solve. So language models are 100% getting commoditized. So this is how it usually happens in these types of technology cycles as well, right? The infrastructure layer becomes a commodity, and then value accrues in the application layer, where you have like real business problems that you're solving for real people. So that's where we're headed now.
Awesome. With that, I think we'll close it out. Thank you so much to the panel. It was a really engaging discussion. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for leading the panel. Thank you to our panelists.